Whenever they invite me to do these talks, I more or less talk about world building, but try to place it in the context of whatever event they invited me to or what's going on in the world. So we do use AI tools in some fashion. Some things from Magenta. We played around with AI voices because we have some voice acting in the radio program, so it's simply quicker. We played around also with making music for soundtracks. AIVA is kind of neat, but what's interesting is when you scroll on the website, basically the utility of this boils down to no license headache. So you get something that is mediocre as far as music goes, but you don't have to go through all of the legal hassle. So because we create all of the music in-house and we have many external collaborators in terms of music, it's very complicated from a legal standpoint. And unlike most gaming studios, we don't license it out, but since we are creators and have external co-creators, we also try to take care of them, of vocalists, of trumpet players, of piano players. And we do that by funneling some percentage of streaming income through the back end also to them, which means having lawyers, drafting contracts, because no one in their sane mind would do this. So this makes things simpler. We also play around with making images. So here I just typed in pineapple, and then, for example, this one is pineapple plus Andy Warhol. This is pineapple plus David Hockney. This is Kanye plus Kazimir Maljevic. So where do we use it? So we have these collectibles in one of our games, Highwater, and there's no time to do every front page. So basically, we create some blurry image and you have a fresh original collectible. So what I'm trying to say is we basically use it as a crutch to speed things up. But what I am interested in is basically for creating the world building and generally the ethos of Demagogue Studio, I mean the name of the company is Demagogue, is all of the fault points, all of the contradictory points in any system and anything that is fashionable at the moment. So everyone is talking about big data and AI, and what I like is when it doesn't work. So one example is climate models. So they realized that they miscalculated how clouds work because the bottom of a cloud behaves very differently from the top of the cloud. And they missed some estimates by 3 times. That's not a small data. That's like way off. So I love when people who are esteemed and famous and get funding get things wrong. So there is also an expression, you know, Aristophanes, the Greek playwright, he has that famous quote, "Oh, clouds, give me some good advice." And I generally think that artists are in some ways shape-shifting cloud makers. The greatest cloud painter of all time is Constable. And what I'm interested in is, does Constable, as a painter of clouds, know something about clouds that the climate model doesn't know? Is there knowledge in this oil on canvas that exists in the AI model and vice versa? Or with the invention of photography, whether Anselm Adams captures clouds in some way that is fundamentally new and interesting, or does Constable have something to say that Anselm Adams with the invention of photography doesn't? So basically, if we compare, like these are thousands of years apart, what are the merits and what is kind of the ontological implication of moving images by Muybridge and cave paintings? And the blurriness, that jump between those two, that's what our games are about in a way. And the answer to this question is in a way given through a provocation by the greatest artist of the 20th century, and this is the most important artwork of the 20th century, the urinal. And what he noted is the following. So you have a bunch of grown people, unfortunately mostly men, who paint peaches, oranges, and apples with pretty colors, get tenure at universities, are respected intellectuals in the early 20th century, and they are the vanguard. We are the avant-garde. I painted a black square. I'm so important. And at the same time, you have Albert Einstein discovering the curvature of the time-space continuum, who is also a revered intellectual. So Duchamp said, something is wrong. We're painting peaches, and we think that we are relevant, and the whole landscape of our reality with Heisenberg and Einstein are changing. We need to up the game in the arts. So he said, here is my answer. And the answer is very interesting from multiple perspectives. So he said, retinal art, art for the eye, is not interesting anymore. Making images is not interesting. That was never the essence of art. Something else is. Framing, context, art for the mind. So that's one implication. A second implication is machine-made objects are cooler than any sculpture that humans make nowadays. If you track back to Michelangelo, there weren't many human-made objects. You leave your house, you see a bunch of other shitty houses, nature, your farmland, and then you reach a cathedral, and that's awe-inspiring. Or a church, and you see the Sistine Chapel. But in the 20th century, cars, airplanes, urinals, it's all much more impressive than contemporary sculpture. So he, just in this one piece, has many implications. I mentioned just two. So my contention is, with the introduction of AI, I think it's the question of whether it can change, make artists obsolete is the wrong question. It simply forces the artist to say, oh, let me just dig deeper. What's the point of making art? So natural progression from the urinal, from pissing to the sun, this is a contemporary 21st century art piece from the Tate Modern and the Turbine Hall. Olafur Eliasson created the sun, which means it's not a picture on the wall anymore. It's an ecosystem that changes depending on the behavior of the visitors who bask in the sun, and this also has implications to the dialogue of climate change at large. So it's it's atmosphere. It's not even an object. It's something completely new. So here I connect this just to my father. As I said, I like to incorporate my own life somehow to make it interesting. He recently passed away at 85, and he used to work at the Bell Labs, very esteemed place. And at that time, AT&T had 1 million employees. Now, my father, by nature, was a contrarian. He liked to get into fights. So he left Yugoslavia to get a PhD at the Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn, which is now part of NYU. And the thesis was systems theory. His mentor gave him a chance to emigrate to the US to use his math knowledge to prove that system theory, which was then popular in the way big data is today, that everything can be turned into math through system theory, from management to biology, everything. As I said, they're basically doing that with so-called data science today. And what he has done, he basically disproved his mentor's thesis via math, that it's impossible to reduce all of these complex systems simply to mathematical models. So he showed me also Russell Ackoff, who is a famous system theory professor, who talked about these concepts that I find interesting for our world building. The difference between doing things right and doing the right thing. So doing things right means you can do multiple times in the right way the wrong thing. Years pass, the error compounds, even though your menial task was correct. It's much better to do one right thing. So going back to my dad, he worked for General Motors. So he would say to them, wait, General Motors always says the client comes first. If that's the case, then we should have the best means of transportation from A to B. You shouldn't be making cars, really. You should make trains. So a normal person doesn't say that to their employer that makes cars, but he had a point. And Akoff criticized, for example, the boom of Toyota in Japan car manufacturing because he thought it's the right answer to the wrong question. They should have invested in different means of transportation. The difference between simply being efficient in something that you shouldn't be efficient in and being effective, having the right answer. And hence the difference between knowledge of wisdom, which all of you who work in data know this pyramid. But this pyramid is interesting because even data is not one thing. There's subjective and objective data. And as we know, even in physics, some data even depends on the viewer of the data. What I am interested in, the kind of ideology of our games, is these jumps from one layer to the other and all of the cloudy blurriness that happens in between. Also, Noam Chomsky, the famous linguist, basically boils down this to the difference between understanding, which is what hard science does, like Einstein, and what so-called data science does is fair approximations of a bunch of data to have some predictions, which, if you fundamentally don't understand clouds, can lead to errors even in a small area of study like clouds. This is interesting. I have friends, for example, at Seven Bridges Genomics. They, all are super smart and deal with genome sequencing. They told me, it's amazing what we're doing. We're actually helping in cancer research. But what is interesting is we still don't know the contents of a human cell. We don't have fundamentally the full understanding of what the cell does. So that's just something to take into consideration. Now, AI in gaming is basically this.
It can always turn around.
You can always turn around. So it's, dopamine thing. So basically, early cinema had a kind of mentality like this clip I showed you about gaming, which is, this is a kind of algorithm for filmmaking. So you put two shots together, a shot of you, bored out of your mind, and a shot of me speaking. Those two shots splice together, tell the story, oh, there are some bored people at a conference. And depending on their combination, you get different emotions in the viewer. But then you realize it's actually more complicated. Within each shot, you have many layers. And also when you add the music, it's a kind of multi-layered algorithm. This is from Sergei Eisenstein's Alexander Nevsky. Now, another person that died relatively recently is my kind of idol, Jean-Luc Godard, and he had yet a different style of montage. And when you look at his edits, he has this famous quote, a film needs to have a beginning, middle, and end, not necessarily in that order. So if you think about the matrix of all shots, you can assemble the shots any way you like, and it will tell a different story. But there's yet another approach. So this is a shot from Tarkovsky's Nostalgia that lasts, I think, 12 minutes. And it's the goal of this guy is to take the candle from one end of this empty pool to the other. And it goes back and forth. Now, the implication of this is it's not simply an algorithm. It's more complicated. The contents of these shots of this one shot is multi-layered, it's spiritual, it's open to the viewer's interpretation. It's not reducible to an effect like those shots I showed you at the beginning. So That's basically a completely different approach to, and this was used in gaming. So when I was at GDC, the guys who made Kentucky Route Zero, they openly said that Tarkovsky was a big influence for them, and you basically have David Lynch come Tarkovsky long shots within their game that also imply mood, vibe, something that is not reducible. Then you have, this is kind of the Yugoslav or Serbian version of Godard, in some ways even more brilliant, Dusan Makavejev and his film WR Mysteries of the Organism. And in the foreground, you have Milena Dravić and this ballet dancer and their kind of love story. But in the back, you have this weird theory about sex and the connection between totalitarian regimes in the East and the West and sexual repression. It's a very weird film. It's a cult classic. And this approach of Godard and Makavejev exists even in mainstream cinema. So Adam McKay's The Big Short splices together the main storyline of these characters and the history of economics and how the stock market works. He did it kind of also in Don't Look Up, but a religious version of that is The Tree of Life, where you have the main story with Brad Pitt spliced together with the creation of the universe and kind of Malik's spiritual proclivities. Now, to close this section with Jean-Luc, he is the genius of them all. So his last film that premiered at Cannes, The Image Book, splices together Transformers and Al-Qaeda and Abu Ghraib and all kinds of things in this media seascape and mishmash. But his press conference in Cannes was done through FaceTime. And basically, journalists, this is kind of absurd. So journalists stood in line to talk with a phone. And it's almost like this extends the film beyond that film into the press conference. So this, broadly speaking, montage out of film is what we're interested in at Demagogue. Now, Godard famously said, I'm looking to the death of cinema with great optimism, and that's kind of why I, as a filmmaker, entered gaming. But death of cinema is very interesting from the Hollywood perspective. So this is a graph that maps out the lowering of volatility of the market for Hollywood films. In other words, is the history of de-risking for Hollywood investors. Now, what's interesting here is this is new Hollywood. So all of the upstarts, the no-names, like Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Coppola, they weren't famous. Coppola wasn't a big shot when he got to direct the first Godfather. So the paradox is, because when you run a company, you need to lower risk, the new Hollywood was almost dead from the beginning because Hollywood executives had to find a formula how to make the next Jaws. And whenever they tried to use the formula, it would fail. And the formula through time ended up being blockbusters that we have today with Avengers. And the fact is, from a purely profit margin perspective, it does work. It lowers risk. What doesn't happen is it's almost impossible to make a mid-budget film that is as genius as Jaws today. So the effect today is a kind of everything is happening in multiverses. So indie version of a multiverse released by A24 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. And the kind of de-risking version of that for the masses is The Avengers. And all of this is happening because of something that this chic Berlin magazine talked about in this famous issue, The Big Flat Now, which is everything is big today, which means it's gigantic. Just in this conference, you can go to like 4 other rooms and do other things because everything is happening now, everything is instantaneous, and everything is flat, which means that video games and high cinema and talking about art, it's almost like pointless to ask the question, is it art? Because Kim Kardashian, Kanye, Van Gogh, Albert Einstein, it's all the same today because it's all the same on your screen. It has the same real estate, therefore it's the same. And you get that the kind of one answer is to say, oh, the world is fucked. The other answer is to play with it. And who plays best today are the vanguards of today culture, which is hip hop. And A$AP Rocky, the wife of Rihanna. Camille Henro, she, going back to montage, she created this masterpiece, which is an example of desktop cinema. So you have montage through different screens. And you have this big flat now approach also with release of new media. A good example is Blade Runner. One of those examples where they try to hit both the market and the kind of artistic aspirations. But what's interesting, the 3 short films from Blade Runner were released on YouTube, and in my opinion, the anime is better than even the main film. So that means that there's multiple points of entry to the same universe. The new Ridley Scott just signed with Amazon, a huge deal for the series. So it doesn't really matter. A lot of people will now enter to Blade Runner from that series and then discover the original Blade Runner much later. Now, Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, he has done this approach with kind of world building his own self. So the Graduate collaboration with the contemporary artist Murakami, his first websites fully inspired by Akira, then Running for President, which is a kind of like Diogenes, the Greek philosopher who walks around with a lantern naked in a barrel, kind of making a fool of yourself type of performance art. And then you have the Adidas deal that just broke off 2 weeks ago, and the collab with Balenciaga. So you basically have a world building around that and him using game characters and his own music videos to explore the idea of what it means to be black. So to kind of boil down this bullshitting, we can start with this is kind of the main cinematic language where what I studied in school basically. But what I ended up being interested in right after graduation is something more complex. This is a work by Mark Lombardi that is also a diagram, and it traces the connections between the Bush family, Citibank, the Bank of London, different airplane companies, and Saudi Arabia and the Bin Laden family. And this was way before 9/11. And the interesting thing about this drawing is that it's the only drawing that the FBI asked the Whitney Museum to have access to because Mark Lombardi did amazing research. But when you look at that diagram, maybe we can take it a step further and have it in 3D space. This is a work by Thomas Saraceno, and spider webs built this. And as a metaphor, it's interesting because you can thread the needle from any place. And if this is your creation here, you should allow any spot for people to enter and get lost in this. And as far as I'm concerned, this here is the spider's metaverse. And Pierre Huyghe, in my kind of humble opinion, we're doing what in games what Pierre Huyghe has done in contemporary art. This is a documenta installation, a kind of post-apocalyptic ecosystem, and the main performer is this beautiful dog. And he placed sculptures, concrete, flora and fauna, and you enter the space, and it's a living, breathing ecosystem. Now go back to Urinal and the critique that painting apples might not be enough if you really want to move the needle as far as the history of art. Buckminster Fuller is basically creating also environments, going back to The Sun by Olafur Eliasson, via architecture. Anna Imhoff, at the moment the most famous German artist, creates these performance pieces where you enter into the space and the vibe is created through the interaction with other performance artists. Some of them are humans, but some of them can be drones. And that's not very different from Fortnite. So Travis Scott performs. There's a lot of people who are simultaneously present in the game, and they can witness this music concert. So then Unity and here I'm going to the point of this talk, which is what we are doing at Demagogue Studio. So Unity, the game engine, invited me to talk about transmedia, and I had no idea what that was. I Googled it, I saw this definition, and I said, yeah, I'll lecture on this because we're already doing this. But what I didn't like about this terminology, and I heard he's a professor at, I think, NYU, is it basically boils down to when you are creating a world, think also about toys and other spin-offs like TV series and so forth. But that's, I mean, Japan has done that so brilliantly. Like if you look at Evangelion Genesis, or if you look at Cowboy Bebop, oftentimes it starts actually with a toy, and because they're so brilliant, they take it to another level and it becomes this amazing series or film. So I don't know, and I didn't think this really explains like Star Wars and the way Star Wars created their merchandise. I didn't think this really explains what the new frontier is. So this is more a kind of image I like, and it's lifted from a German philosopher, very controversial guy, who wrote a trilogy on bubbles called Peter Sloterdijk, and that's this kind of visualization is more interesting for me. In other words, I think my job and the job of the whole company, Demagogue Studio, is this. We create bubbles, and within these bubbles, we create those diagrams and nets of stories and different experiences. But the main thing is to create a bubble. This is the bubble of One Piece. There's so many characters here, which means that all of you can find someone to identify with, and that's how you enter the world of One Piece. And you can enter through comic books, through animated series, and through games. The games are so-so, but a new release is coming around the corner, and they're promising it will be good. Then you have Overwatch. I don't play Overwatch, but I know what it is thanks to the short films that are available on YouTube. They have amazing characters, great storytelling, great direction. It's fun. Nier Automata. I never played Nier Automata. I know a lot about it and around it, but now I will also have a point of entry because the series is coming out. And what the creator said is usually the game's release is happening simultaneously with the anime version to gain synergy for the market primarily, because that drives sales of games. But here there's a gap, and we'll see. It will be interesting. So that's basically the bubble is the world creation, and within the world we tell stories. And there's this theory, and you can find this video up on YouTube, about soft and hard world building. And basically, soft world building, which is what we do, means that there's a lot of open questions. You don't define everything. It's not like Lord of the Rings, where you have a fully defined language. And kind of our internal idol, Hayao Miyazaki, is a good example of soft world building. And he's also a good example of telling ecological stories without being preachy about it. And this is roughly what the difference between soft and hard world building is. In our case, it also makes sense from a business perspective, because if we leave things unsaid, we can build other games around it and come up with new ideas. Now, Golf Club Wasteland, the game that kind of put us on the map, started with this conundrum. Who is correct here, and are they all correct, and so forth. And it's about our relationship to the Earth. And at that time, 2017-18, it became clear Trump will be president. Musk became this celebrity entrepreneur. So I added those two things together, and I thought this is an actual documentary photo, and I thought about it, okay, if the world comes to an end, that's actually great if you're an investor in golf courses, because you'll get all of this free real estate. So Trump had a problem in Scotland. He wanted to build a golf course. The local farmer didn't want to let him. So this was kind of the original idea for Golf Club Wasteland. And this is the ad. So yeah, it's very simple, the premise, and basically the premise is there was a great ecological catastrophe, the ultra-rich escaped, evacuated to Tesla City on Mars, we are all dead, and now they return to Earth to play golf in the ruins. And yeah, so in the world building, first of all, we had to keep it simple to be a side scroller, because at the time all of my partners had day jobs, so we needed to optimize the workflow. So it's a 2.5D game with this diorama vibe. With the architecture, the idea was, let's use modernism, because modernists believed in progress and the technology will save us, and all of the good stuff about lifting all of the boats, not only, I mean, everyone forgot about that, but, we can also incorporate something in the world building that we know about, which is New Belgrade and the architecture we grew up in. So a lot of contemporary sci-fi relies on Bangkok and Hong Kong and Shanghai and so forth, but why not sci-fi the F out of Belgrade? And Jean-Luc Godard has done that with Paris in Alphaville, and Kubrick has done that with London in Clockwork Orange. So that was the thinking, and that's the whole backdrop. So we use also Spomenix, which is a English bastardization of a Serbo-Croat word Spomenik, which is a monument. And we thought to ourselves, going back to blackness, okay, if all of these Tumblr and Instagram accounts are appropriating our architecture and our bloody history, let us take it back and use it for our own kind of sci-fi storytelling. And then there are the neons. They shine and they're pretty and they're pink, and it's a reference also on Blade Runner. And in the neons, what we would do is we would use memes. So one meme was Kofefe, because the guy can't spell. And we would basically, at the time, by accident, there was a show at the MoMA about Yugoslav architecture. We mixed that to tell a story via the background in the side scroller. And the result is basically this. So you have a monument, Podgoric, which is a monument to our anti-fascist struggle, next to the post-ideological meme of the big flat now, Kofefe, and you have the hazmat-clad Charlie who reluctantly plays golf on a dead Earth. And what I basically have done when I had met the guys from Apple, and later when we pitched it to port on console and PC, was I sold the premise. I literally told them the one-liner, and everyone immediately likes it, especially if they're from Silicon Valley, because those are their friends. And with the gameplay, we kept it simple. We had to tell the same story. I'm not a huge gamer, but I used to play the MS-DOS game Gorillas, where you type in the angle of a banana and a gorilla throws a banana, you know. So we have, and the hugely important thing for us, me being also a filmmaker, is storytelling. So I needed to use the shitty golf mechanic to tell a story. So there's a story of a boy that you meet at the end of the game who is a mutant and ostensibly the last living human. You have the diary of Charlie, the golfer, and the thing that no sane person would do for a mobile game, which is build the whole fucking soundtrack and in-game radio program for a mobile game. And that's Radio Nostalgia from Mars. So I was basically dealing with my complexes because I didn't want to go into virtual stuff. I wanted to be John Cassavetes. I wanted to be a filmmaker. So the radio was an excuse for me to work with people, especially musicians. So the premise, so let me jump straight to the soundtrack. This is the soundtrack. You can get it online. And speaking of multiple points of entry, I know a lot of people who simply listen to the soundtrack without ever playing the game. So around this, so we released the game, we have the soundtrack, and we also did 3, and mind you, on the short run, there's no upside from a business point of view. It's just a lot of work. We've done 3 animated videos. One is for this title song, Take My Hand. This here is the hand of Lenin pointing into the great future with his index finger cut off, and it's lifted from the film Ulysses Gaze by Theo Angelopoulos. And this is kind of, we would use Unity also to build these videos.
Take my hand, don't let go. I know we won't get lost on our way home. Take my hand, don't let go. The signs are fake and the maps are false, but we must go on.
The full videos are up on YouTube, or we've done this, which is very pertinent for the current moment. It's an American and a Russian astronaut aboard the International Space Station. They're arguing. So the American claims that Kubrick is greater than Tarkovsky. The other guy claims that Dostoevsky is greater than Jack London, who has the better artists. And it looks like this.
2 astronauts on the space station argued about art, values, and international relations. 2 astronauts argued. They speak in 2 tongues, but still for hours they talk. The same oxygen in their lungs, the same thrill on their spacewalks.
Real estate on the moon is also sold out. And then we've done this Distant Thunder video, which I have to speed up, so I'll skip this, but it tells the story from the ending of the game when Charlie meets the cub, this mutant kid. Yeah, so this would be the flat, boring transmedia version of the project. Keep in mind, Radio Nostalgia from Mars is for people who live in Tesla City on Mars, and they call, like the film with Meg Ryan, Sleepless in Seattle. So they call the radio show to share their memories of how cool it used to be when they lived on Earth. So the radio is kind of the cornerstone. But what I'm interested in is these constellations. I lifted the constellation term from Olga Tokarczuk, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And to go back to the neons, I would look through the news, and that's how I come up with these memeable neons. So there was an actual Ministry of Loneliness in UK. I mean, a minister within a larger ministry, and LOL is shining because it's funny. But then this is Ars Electronica. I built the neons physically. So that means that this virtual space is going out into the real world, and it also implies that we're already living in the wasteland. We are just not recognizing that the apocalypse is already happening. And this is Weltschmerz in the level, and this is Weltschmerz at Gallery Anita Beckers in Frankfurt, which represents me. And here you have Podgoric, you have Podgoric plus Trump, and you have it also in at Anita's gallery. So DigiDopamine, that's the AI gaming thing, the business model, digital plus dopamine. Kofefe, the Trump meme, and Zuck. In the WikiLeaks things, it was Zuck at fb.com was his email. And they're all related, obviously, with the US elections and so forth. Now, for the future projects, I needed to persuade my team why we should waste our time on doing games plus all of this around it, and why to stick to the same world, and that eventually they will become rich. So I found the evidence for this from Matthew Ball. He is a VC from the Makers Fund in San Francisco, and his thesis is you don't have companies in the entertainment industry anymore that are like Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, you remember the lion, who are in the motion picture business. No, now you have companies that own intellectual properties and that can be completely agnostic about the medium that they roll out. So the point is to tell a story, have compelling characters that people build attachment to, and then, he is a ruthless capitalist, you monetize the love for the characters. So, to pitch this to my team, I would show them George Lucas, and I would say, we're basically doing what he has done in the frontier of storytelling and technology, because he built all of the awesome technology that we use today as CGI, not for technology's sake, but as a tool to tell his space opera. And Bob Iger, who is a pretty effective CEO, recognized that and bought Star Wars. And Bob Iger would say, we bought the Marvel universe because it has 4,000 characters, multiply that by the number of sequels, and we have a lot of content to milk. So, but a more realistic version would be Raw Fury, who has games of modest success that also managed to be licensed out to Hollywood. So basically my pitch was, let's continue Charlie's story and let's see what happens after Charlie meets the mutant kid. And that's this.
A mutant of tomorrow. I've got no time for sorrow. I'm the son of no one, the son of no one.
I vaguely remember hearing my mother's heartbeat as we made our way to the launch pads. But the most vivid memory I have is standing alone, watching the shuttles leave, evacuating you to Mars. Those left behind started to turn on each other. So I escaped, deep into the forest.
Lungs and legs propel me. You cannot buy or sell me. I move through life like water. No one's son, no one's daughter. I am the son of no one, the son of no one.
Years passed, and then suddenly you appeared again. At the time, I didn't know I had something you wanted. Immunity.
This bastard will overcome even the Armageddon.
So this is coming out in the first half of next year, and again, we continue. Radio Nostalgia from Mars continues in the kid's helmet, because the kid kills one of the enemies and puts the helmet on and can listen to the radio program. And again, it's another excuse for me to write a bunch of lyrics and have actually people with talent perform them. Again, we started with references. Our kind of model for gameplay is we look at successful gameplays from the 90s and we see how we can utilize them to tell the stories, the visuals, and the themes that are relevant today. And huge fans of Heart of Darkness. And we build the characters, the enemies, and suddenly the world comes alive. We again have the big neons and telling the story of our contemporary life in the background. And the things that existed in the previous game exist now as well, but now there are actual polygons in the level design. We have, again, references of Yugoslav architecture, the Museum of Contemporary Art, designed by Ivan Antic and Ivan Karaspopovic, is a beautiful kind of crystal structure. We use it here, and we have this Aphrodite shooting a selfie. Again, now it's a also an actual level in the game, the Podgoric Monument. And what happened then, here's my response to Duchamp. Now, this is me intervening into the modernist canon. But then we signed this huge deal completely randomly for a prequel game. This is the week before the ultra-rich leave to Mars. And you are a random person with a normal wage, just living in a flood zone. And you decide, oh no, I'll emigrate to Alphaville and I'll board the rocket to Mars that is reserved only for the likes of Bezos, Musk, and so forth. And this immigration story is the basis of
Good morning, High Water dwellers. High Water Pirate Radio keeping you in the know with our flow. Alphaville authorities continue to deny false rumors that Alphaville elites are planning to evacuate to Mars. True or not, the one thing we can't deny is that the world ended on a sunny day.
The world ended on a sunny day. Boys and girls surfing in the bay. Kids clamored in the park. No one suspected the coming dark. The wave was coming, but the sky was clear. I let it wash over me. Swept away, swept away, swept away without fear. Swept away, swept away, swept away without fear. The world ended on a sunny day. Boys and girls surfing in the bay. Children clamored in the park. No one suspected the coming.
2023. So again, we have Genix as a big landmark, but now it's in the flood. And again, you heard the title song. These are some of the lyrics. This time performed by Mina Spiller, my college crush from the singer of Laibach. So Nikos, he is the main character of this game, named after Nikos Kazantzakis, the guy that wrote the sequel to the Odyssey. And he has the radio here, and we're listening to High Water Pirate Radio, which is the prequel of Radio Nostalgia for Mars, before the radio host emigrated to Mars as well. We have the Cosmi Monument, and it's also featured in the Cub, but here you have a mine, which is a reference to lithium mining and the Rio Tinto affair. You have Alphaville, which is the main city, and it's protected from the flood with dam walls, but it's also a reference to Apple's headquarters. So it's a mishmash of Silicon Valley, Yugoslavia, communism, ultra-capitalism, and it's just a shit show. And You have Metropolis by Fritz Lang as a reference for Alphaville. We have these monorails, reference to NASA. In our case, it's AASA because it's Alphaville. And you all remember, if you lived here, these famous kiosks. They're funny because they look like something from space. This was a Slovenian architect, and it's like pre-IKEA level of modular genius. And we use them as space pods. But in Belgrade, they were used for selling hot dogs. And that's the glitch. That's the cloud that's funny to us. Yeah, and these are the examples of how that happens. Remember Buckminster Fuller, Alphaville Godard, and so forth. And then they put on hazmats to be undercover and entered Alphaville. The combat system here is turn-based. So again, we had the golf game, we have a platformer, a kind of Sega Jungle Book, and now we have puzzle-based, turn-based combat. So there's even multiple points of entry for different tastes in terms of gameplay. And all of these kind of encounters are ideological, humorous, and have a kind of slapstick quality about them. And again, we introduce new characters to have robust world building. In the case of Highwater, there is some 100 characters. Rimbaud, reference to the French poet, but also to Montenegrin star Rambo Amadeus. Josephine, kind of my homage to I'm now blanking on her name. Sofia Boutella, just another crush. George, I come from a farming family, so we had to have a kind of farming burly guy. Laura, Lynn, so a whole host of characters that simply make the world, yeah, the Orthodox priest, he can throw anathemas. And you have the Alphavillian enemies that you engage with. So what we created is this, and then within that, the games are something like this. And the more we fill this, and this can go much, much wider. And what my kind of vision is, The Wire, in my opinion, the greatest artwork of this century, is this sprawling sociological thing that goes a lot beyond simply the episodic format. Rick and Morty isn't even, it's so meta that if you really want to engage with Rick and Morty, you need to engage with 1,000 other shows, literature, and contemporary media. And you have Love, Death, Robots, which is a kind of collective experiment in making a series. Or you can do something like Donald Glover, if you have that star power, and create the world building in this multiple media experience. As a musician, he's, as a musician, Childish Gambino, or as the creator of the TV series Atlanta, which in my book is the best show after Breaking Bad. So Gorillas, it's a world building with all of these characters. Now the new tour they're doing has these amazing 3D versions of them. Cowboy Bebop, and of course Zelda, which I think is also announced as a film. Persona, masterpiece. Cyberpunk, very interesting case where Cyberpunk, when it originally came out, obviously made a shit ton of money, but didn't perform so well critically, and it got a new spike in sales thanks to the series. Again, the series, for me, are better than the game. And Arcane is simply like the model of how you want to do that if you're a giant corporation. In our case, we would do the game and the series in-house. And I think that's an interesting differentiator for us in the market. So this is our current proposal, and this is what we will have out soon, and hopefully will be as big as them. So thanks.